Hello everyone, my name is Zeph and welcome to the Star Network podcast. Today we have with us our special guest, Adesuwa Belo-Osagie, who's the co-founder and deputy CEO of 715 Capital and CEO of Husk Collection. Hi Adesuwa, it's good to have you on the show.
Hi Zeph, thanks so much for having me here today.
Great, awesome. So 715 Capital, right, is a real estate development company, but I think you can provide us with more insights about what you do and talk to us about your first development, which is 715 Lakeside Estate in Abuja.
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much. So 715 Capital is a real estate investment and development firm. We're headquartered in Abuja, and most of our projects have been based in Abuja, but we're now currently expanding to Lagos. We primarily focus on residential estates in prime locations across, major cities in Nigeria. In terms of our long-term plans, we're hoping that ultimately we'll expand beyond Nigeria and across West Africa. Ghana is a country of interest, given that I'm half Ghanaian myself. Yeah. So in terms of our first project, 715 Lakeside Estate, that was completed in 2023. We commissioned the project. We had a launch ceremony with a number of, reputable guests and dignitaries, which was really, really exciting. It's a combination of apartment blocks, terraces, and detached villas, and it sits right along the Jabi Lake, the only body of water in Abuja, which is a particularly exciting location because it means that our clients, our residents are able to get beautiful views across the lake. And we also really strongly believe in Jabi as a location, a prime location. We felt when we first picked that location, there was a lot of value to be gained, from developing there. It's one of the locations in which we're seeing a lot of growth and development in terms of, an increase in jobs, an increase in people living in the area, an increase in different amenities. It's really close to key central areas in Abuja, close to the business district, not too far from the airport. So that was, a location that was really exciting for us.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for that context. And I like how you and your team are able to be very strategic in where you are going to build, because I think today, real estate, one, I find to be very interesting. It's not like an area that I know a lot about, but I'm interested in it. And which is why when I saw the 715 Capital proposal, I was like, this is great to have Adesuwa to share more. But I like that you are strategic to say, what is a prime location that is going to cater to young professionals and families, right? And sometimes people just build in all kinds of locations that are not very economical or there is no benefit, but being very intentional to say this is a prime location that people are going to flock into, right? I also like that there was intentionality to build near the water, near the lake, right? Reason being is that Lagos, as we see it, is an island. And I know we're speaking about Abuja, but Lagos specifically is an island. There's so much water. And when I see so many buildings being built in certain locations and they're dredging and they're covering up the water, and I just think to myself, how do they not see that this is an attraction and so much value is going to be held in this property if they just didn't build on the water, if they were intentional to leave a bit of space so people have a view? And those things are important for your mental health or even just raising the value of the property in the future.
Just to feed off the points that you made, because I think you've made some really good points. I think that currently there are various ways in which we don't always maximize our natural landscape. And I think that really that's, what is sitting behind what you're saying. You've
Correct.
Noted yourself, even without being in the industry, that we just don't fully maximize, what we've been blessed with, right? And I think it's really important to think about doing that as developers, as designers, as architects, right? Think about using what we've got on ground in the best ways. It's beyond just filling lots of spaces with lots of units because that means you can sell as much as possible. Sometimes it's about thinking beyond that and thinking about the lifestyle and the experience that your residents will ultimately have once they're living in these spaces. And that for us means retaining certain green areas, thinking about maximizing the views, even if every single unit in an entire estate, because some of our estates go up to say 100 plus, right, units in terms of estates, in Abuja specifically. You've got to think about, can you have some of the communal and common areas that all residents will be able to enjoy, be ones that sit, right along the border of the water and get to enjoy these fantastic views so that everyone gets some of that additional value.
Correct. And I love that you said that, right? And even just in casual conversations, when I speak to people and they say, for instance, they're moving, right? They're going to a different country. And when you ask them, what are the key factors that have influenced that decision? So beyond like economic prosperity, etc., whatever it is, the key thing is just lifestyle, right? The lifestyle of the environment in which our market currently operates doesn't actually appreciate third spaces. So I would say a third space is like a park, or a third space is like having like a playground for children, exactly, or having a space that is, I don't know, like a green conservatory house where people can go into, or even just a view on the water, right? Those spaces are very limited to specific buildings, and in terms of affordability, it's not very affordable for like the average Nigerian. So you would hear that people are saying, I want to be able to move to like England or like even like Canada, etc., because of those things are huge considerations for them. They want to be able to take their children out on a walk and have fresh air, right? So I feel like those things, I know that in those areas, there's like policy regulation to how things should be built. I don't think that we've gotten that right here. So I like that you highlighted that. But what I find more interesting is that you guys have done this development, right? And I just want you're young, just like me. You are young. And I think you're young. I think someone listening to this episode who is interested in real estate, has never done it, a question on their mind will probably be, what was that process like building, right? What was that like? So people will tend to say, even just finding the development company to work with, do you go into like a joint venture? Can you tell us more about the experience building? What's the capacity of 715 Lakeside Estate?
Sure, yeah. Completely. I'll take you through each of the steps, I think, from the, first to the last one. I think of the sort of arc of developing a residential estate like this. So I think the first key step for us was considering funding and your budget, right? Without the necessary funds, or without sufficient funds, one really can't move forward. And that in itself, I know in Nigeria, can be a really difficult step, right? I'm not naive about the fact that funding is often really difficult. It's not that easy to get financing, is the truth. It can be really tough to get loans. And even where you do secure a loan, you're often looking at extremely high rates, right? So that can be pretty tough. I think in terms of tips and guidance I would give people, it's probably a lot of the same sorts of things you'd hear when you're considering other forms of business, right? Try to maximize use of your personal networks to see if there might be funding or investment options coming in that way. Consider perhaps at the beginning, if you don't necessarily have, as much in terms of funding, some off-plan sales to help mitigate some of your funding needs, or, to help carry you across the line in terms of as you're developing. And then over time, if you have experiences in other businesses and you've been fortunate enough to build a credit profile, right? You may be able to have the trust, of key institutions where you can actually get loans, and then you can use that, as part of the funding and the budgeting for the project. So once you do find a way to secure your funding and you've got a budget in mind, I think the next key step is the land acquisition. Just as you noted already, there are different ways to do this. So you can purchase a plot of land outright, or you can decide to enter into a joint venture arrangement with a landowner, right? The main benefit if you purchase the land outright is that you control, everything really going on in terms of the development. That can have a lot of different, repercussions that might be helpful for you as a developer. If there are market conditions that change, that fluctuate, you might decide to tweak various elements of the development, and you can do that far easier because you fully control, the land and what you're doing with the land. There's no one else in terms of that landowner who you need to be answering to, or who you need to get, that person's buy-in before you can make some of those changes that you might want to. So it makes you a little bit more adaptable, more flexible in terms of what you're doing. I think obviously the key benefit if you enter into a joint venture arrangement is that your capital requirement is, of course, reduced. So that's, a major incentive, right? You've got someone who owns the land. You don't need to put this much money into purchasing the land and locking it up. And so you're freer, you're a bit more flexible in terms of your funds to use them towards the development and, other things that you might be involved in. So, in terms of 715, we've used both arrangements, right? There are plots that we've purchased outright, and then there's certain arrangements that we've entered into exactly with landowners as our partners, and then sort of just dealing with the arrangements that way. I would say if you are entering into a joint venture arrangement, it's really important to work with a trusted landowner and partner, because the other aspect of land acquisition for anyone trying to get into this sort of business is, of course, title verification and due diligence, right? We know that these are major issues in Nigeria. It's not the easiest place in which to deal with making sure that, your title documentation is tight and that whoever you're dealing with, who is the alleged landowner, is indeed the landowner.
Correct.
And there are no other conflicting or competing interests, right, that you need to think about and deal with. So I think that's the other really important part about the land acquisition. After that stage, once you secured your land, I think the next step is really surveying the site and thinking about the designs, right? So I really recommend dedicating a significant amount of time to thinking about the site on which you're going to develop, your units. Don't rush this stage. I think often there's a temptation to rush this stage because people are really keen to get right into the building and they just want to see something tangible, coming up. But when it comes to building large estates, right, of the size that, we have done and are involved in, if you don't spend enough time in the planning stages, it is really easy for what might even seem like a minor mistake or a minor slip to ultimately mean much more significant adverse consequences down the line, right? When it comes to construction and building, things are not that easy to change. A lot of different processes feed into each other. And so you'll find that once you make a tweak in one area, it has a lot of knock-on effects in various other areas. So think carefully about your site surveying and then your design, your layout, etc. I think after that, you want to think about what contractors you're going to be working with. So some people will have certain activities that they carry out in-house. Again, this, is what 715 does. We have certain activities that we'll do in-house. It can also vary depending on the project. And then we'll have certain activities that we outsource by working with, contractors who we really believe in and who we vetted to make sure that we're confident that, they can carry out the development to the standards that we require. We then have a team of project managers, and our own in-house experts who monitor the work, guide the work, make sure that things, stay on track and our timelines, are as expected. Another really important thing, I think, is you've got to make sure that your team has a lot of experience, right? Again, the labor market in Nigeria is not always the easiest one, right? It's not always easy to vet the skills that, different people have who might be involved in your development. So, a team that is experienced enough to identify issues is extremely key, right? In terms of 715, our CTOs, in Lagos and Abuja, both have close to 3 decades of experience, right, in real estate and real estate, development, both commercial and residential construction. Our team of project managers, over 100 years combined for sure, in terms of the amount of time they've spent working on different developments. And so they are able to, identify things early on and make sure that various issues are addressed, in the right way and the work is done as it should be. Once you've dealt with your contractors who you're going to secure and you've got the right contracts and documentation in place, then you can really launch into the building/construction phase proper. And if we break this phase down, I think there's 4, key stages. clearing of the land, so the site clearance, excavation, you'll do your piling, all that sort of stuff, and there'll be various tests involved in that. Then you're going to be looking at building your key structures.
Is that the sand filling?
Then, yes. So I would consider sand filling sort of part of the full site clearance and foundational works. And then the kind of structures where you're really doing your cement block work, you're moving up, right? And you can really then see the tangible, buildings being constructed before your eyes, which is always like the really, really exciting part of things. After that stage, you're going to be working on your utilities. So you're looking at your MEP work. So the plumbing, the piping, electricals, that sort of stuff. And then the final stage is the finishing, right? Where you're painting your building, you're putting in your tiles, it's the really
that's the fun part.
Exactly. The fun final flourish, right? For most people, because I think that's the part where you really get to accentuate the beauty, right, of the building and hopefully of your design, right, that has really been well thought out. So once all of that is done, you're then going to have a set of inspections, and your quality assurance and quality control. I guess I should say that really in practical terms, inspections, quality assurance, and quality control will be taking place throughout the development. At each stage, you're going to be checking things, making sure there are no issues that may have been missed, making sure there are no snags that may have been missed. So that is a sort of ongoing process. When that is finally done, then you've got your handover, which is really exciting, handover, and then occupancy of the units. And then once that is completed, you're looking at the sort of post-handover stage, where you might be dealing with certain repairs. There might be things that come up that have not necessarily been noted during the building process. This is typical. And so you'll go in, tweak certain things, maybe deal with a bit of general maintenance, just to make sure that, even after you've handed over your units, your clients are completely happy with it. And then I think the stage that, is weaved into all the other stages is really your marketing and your sales and the documentation that underlines those two activities. So you can do off-plan sales, which will mean that, you're selling units while you're developing. So even before the ultimate buyers can see the tangible, units themselves. And often when you're doing that, you're going to be giving some sort of a discount because at the end of the day, there's more risk that they are taking on, right? Because they're buying at an earlier stage of the development without having the benefit of seeing precisely what the product is going to look like. Yeah. And then you will also have sales that you might do once the development is finished. And usually those will be slightly more expensive because ultimately the risk for them is lower, right? And what you can do with the funds at that stage might not be the same as what you might be doing with the funds at an earlier stage of the development process.
I feel like that was very detailed, and it's clear that your passion shows. It's clear that your experience in the real estate space is there, right? And I think a lot of people listening to this are going to learn from it because I think people are interested in real estate, but I don't think they have access to credible information in terms of what are the processes that I need to be going through. Something that stuck out for me, though a lot of what you said was very brilliant, was the legacy issue over like title documents, right? And you find that to be a repetitive issue in our market. So for instance, a young couple decides they want to do a development, maybe like 10 blocks of like flats to start off with. They find the land, they try to purchase the land outright, right? They believe they've gotten all the necessary documentation. This is even like a personal example of someone I know that this happened to. They purchase the land, right? They start the development of the property. They begin to market that property. People are doing deposits in installments, maybe like 30%, from the foundational work. Exactly. So I'm learning in this space. I actually really love it.
Like you definitely have some knowledge.
Exactly. So they do like a 30% initial deposit. And then, as the building progresses, they then say, okay, an additional 30. And then at completion, you then pay your final. So as they started developing this building, the government just came and knocked it down.
Oh my goodness.
And knocked it down because there was this battle over the legality over the ownership of the land. I don't really know the intricacies of what else has happened, but you can imagine how heartbreaking that was in terms of the financial investment, in terms of getting money from other people as well to pay an installment. Now, where does that leave that young couple? They're discouraged. They feel like real estate in Nigeria is pretty much like a scam because of the legacy issues when it comes to like title documents and legalities. It's extremely difficult to prove, right? That couple has done what they thought was the necessary process. Yeah. Someone says that the owner of the land. I have to believe that the owner of the land, right? And although Adesuwa, you have said everything right, you find that people would say, but I went through this process and this was the backfiring. I don't know what the solution is. I'm glad that you have a legal background to defend that. These things are important. Maybe it's getting a really, really good lawyer, right? I don't know. I can't say that that's not what they did. Maybe it's getting a very good lawyer who actually understands the system and the operation when it comes to like title documents. Some people don't even know that, oh, you can. So what I also learned is, for instance, you want to buy property, you're buying the land, the property, land, the development, etc. You want to transfer the title of that document into your name from the previous landowner. What I even found is that if the previous landowner has the title of the land in their name, it's extremely difficult to do that transfer. However, when they have it in a company name, you can just buy the company and then have ownership of that company. Right. So these are, and I wouldn't have known this if we didn't have like a good lawyer, a good agent to break down those intricacies. And I feel like people like you who are in real estate, maybe a solution could potentially be the education around real estate. So beyond even just doing like, you know, your development work and all the technical stuff and the marketing and selling of commercial buildings and residential buildings, I think that even a possible product from a business perspective or even maybe from a CSR perspective could be real estate education. Why? Nigeria is a growing population, right? They said by 2050, we're going to be the third largest in the world. After India and China, right? I believe them. It's true. Yeah. So which means that it is justified to see people building continuously. There are buildings going up. Sometimes I come out of my house, I'm like, when did this building come up? Like from where? There's so much development happening. Exactly. Yeah. And demand for it continues to grow. Exactly. People are moving into Lagos because of the economic opportunities. So therefore, it is necessary that there is real estate education. And I'm not sure anyone has really tapped into that space from a business opportunity. So this is a possible solution for you to look at, where you're educating people on your website. You're telling them little things like what you've explained. What is a title document? What does a transfer mean? What does it mean to survey a land in terms of getting the right measurements? Oh, what does I use Lagos State because I live here, right? What does Lagos State say in terms of building? For instance, I've learned that if you want to do like a build, you can see that in your mind, you want to do a block of, let's say, 10 flats. And in your mind, you want this building to be X high. But according to the law, you shouldn't be going past a set. People don't know these things. And then they get the wrong information because an agent is trying to make a profit. The government will come and knock it down, right? So I think having real estate education is a huge product plus, and I want you to consider it. But
thank you. Thank you so much for that. You've raised a number of interesting points. I just want to touch on a few, if I may. The point about real estate education is honestly a really fantastic one. It's something that I think you're right. Those of us in the industry should probably think about more, you know, in terms of helping clients, potential clients, and just the public at large. I love the idea of it being done as a CSR initiative. I think that is a truly fantastic thing. And so I can commit that 715 is going to look into this further, right? Absolutely. I'm really excited about this idea, you know, what this initiative could be. I think when you look at some of the issues that you've highlighted, and I think about what are the possible solutions or what guidance could I give people, you know, entering into this industry, I think a really key one, as you highlighted yourself, is working with trusted legal professionals. I think that is so important. One of the things I've noted when it comes to my experience in this industry and just in businesses in Nigeria in general is that sometimes there's not as much focus put on, you know, the legal sort of work and the legal aspect of things. I think a lot of times it's really easy in a business to think, okay, the revenue generating side is our, you know, sales, our marketing, they're selling the units, and the legal aspect, oh gosh, it's not that important. Just put some document together, let us sign so that we can get on, you know, with this project, with this transaction, with this deal, right? It's, you know, there's much more focus on the money, right? The money coming in. But if you really think about it, you'll realize that the legal aspect of these sorts of transactions is so important, because while it may not be explicitly clear the benefits, right, that investing a lot in your legal resources can ultimately lead to, when something goes wrong with the legals, you are potentially losing, the entirety of your investment. That is how serious it is. So when you see it in that manner as, pretty much an insurance policy, right, to hopefully make sure to the greatest degree that you can that your transactions don't fail, you'll realize how critical it is to pour a lot into your legal resources. So I think even though it can seem really expensive at the beginning, right, it is really, really beneficial to think about your budget and think about parking a certain amount towards paying your legal teams, right? Because it really can mean major benefits at the end of, the overall transaction. So work with top law firms where you can. Learn what you can about the laws as well yourself, even as a developer and even if you're not in the legal profession, right? When you mention things like purchasing from a company versus purchasing from an individual, those are things that you can think about. These days, we're fortunate enough, right? The internet gives us a lot of resources. One can go out and look on YouTube about these things, read different articles, different blogs about these things. There are different legal resources, right, that one can, access that talk about these different things, will talk you through the processes. I think a key thing is staying updated because we, have different laws that come into effect at different times.
Changing.
Exactly, right. And they're often changing. So it's a good idea to think about ways in which you can keep yourself updated. You can use things like Google Alerts. That's something that we even do in our company within the legal team, in addition to being parts of various associations and organizations, which I understand that not necessarily every layperson may have access to, right, if they're not lawyers themselves. But even something like Google Alerts, right, that can, give you a notification when there's a new law to do with real estate, right, that comes into effect in Nigeria. Then you can have some sort of update on the side on your own. Because often with each different choice you make, there'll be different considerations that you want to think about. So for example, where you might think, let me purchase from a company because it makes things easier. Have you done your due diligence on the company itself?
Correct. Yes.
Because once you're owning the company, right,
you carry the risks.
That's exactly it. You're going to be taking on the liabilities,
Correct.
right, of that corporate entity.
Correct.
So it's something, again, that can be a fantastic idea, but you also want to make sure you're putting a lot of thought into it and consulting, the right legal professionals before you go ahead. I think another key thing that you touched upon that it's important for me to mention when I think about the different stages of development is the approvals process, right? That's another key step when you're thinking about, building residential properties as we have done and, large estates especially. Just as you've noted, approvals are incredibly key. Right. So learning the sorts of approvals, permits, licenses, authorizations that you need to have in place. And there can be a number of them, right? It can be quite a complex, process. So reaching out to the different authorities, going physically to visit their offices so that you have the discussions with them, you get the latest data, you make sure they're 100% clear on what it is you're seeking to do so that they can also feed back to you on what will and will not be possible, I think is really important, right? If you get into this industry or you're just even thinking about who to purchase a property from, right? You want to think about people with a lot of experience, not just in constructing the units, but also in working with the authorities, right? So 715, we put a lot of effort into building strong relationships with the various authorities so that we make sure that they will update us on key, goings on, right? On key matters that need to be brought to our attention as developers. We have very open communication channels so that we can ask them questions about different things. So we can go and verify different matters if we're unsure about any elements, of our processes. So having that sort of strong relationship between the different development authorities and, your company as a development company or those who you're purchasing from is another really big, benefit, right? When you're thinking about this business overall.
I'm just smiling and listening because everything you're saying is it's a full package. And I feel that this is the type of information that people really need. It's not fluff. It's not just, oh yeah, you come and buy land here. You tend to see like advertising things like this. Oh, there's this land, there's this. You don't have the information about it. You don't have the history about that place, right? I like what you said as well about the company situation and even knowing the legacy of that company, right? Who are the owners? Is there like a reputational risk issue? Are they like in debt? Those things actually need to be considered. And as you were speaking, a thought came to my mind and I was like, I'm sure the audience is going to think, yeah, they're talking about real estate, but you know how Nigerians are, where's the money, right? Like, let's be honest, like young people want to be able to do these things, but a huge challenge that they face is one, trust, and two, the finances, right? And in our initial discussion at the beginning, you said you can do this one through like your network, etc., or build up a risk profile and then maybe like secure a loan. The reality of the loan aspect in Nigeria is that traditional banks tend to only give out loans to institutions and corporates because it's less riskier. And in terms of retail lending, we don't really necessarily have a strong, it's not mature enough, exactly. And what is the gap for that? And props to startup businesses that are developing like, lending, etc. I don't really have the data to see whether they have been successful in getting their repayments or not. So I won't touch on it, but I like that the idea and the incentive is there. But I think that a huge solution for people who want to get into real estate and take out loans is, like you said, credit, right? But how does a country begin to build that credit risk environment to assess that, oh, this person, they went to X school, they now have like a professional 9 to 5, this is their general income. So based on their income levels, they're going to be able to pay back if we give them at this interest rates. We don't have that data bank. And I know there's like your national NIN card.
Yes.
And maybe that's, I'm assuming
NIN,
that's the idea. BVN, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the idea, right? To be able to have that data so that people can get loans, or you can assess and track things for people to, people who then want to get into real estate, but it's not mature enough, or maybe it's not moving as quickly enough. But another thing that you said that I also want to touch on is someone listening may say, okay, I see a development, right, that's coming up. An agent has come to market it to me. I'm interested. I want to buy a unit. There's then another case study of, and this one I know, but I won't mention it. So someone says they put in money at a certain percentage and they said, oh, they told them this building will be completed, let's say by 2025. And maybe they invested in it in 2021. Today we're in 2025, the building is not completed. And the people who have done the initial investments they ask questions, what's going on? Stories hearsay, right? And this is a repeated pattern. So the issue is even trust. Unless it is a land that is inherited, or this is the person that owns the land, or this is the person that owns the development or is doing the building, it's very difficult to invest. I have friends who say they live here, but they say, I would never want to buy property in Nigeria. I would rather save and buy property in England or in America because there is a legality system that works, right? And it's different for different people, whatever your pick is, right? But that trust issue, and what comes to my mind is escrows, right? I don't really know how advanced escrows are here, but I know that there's trust, right? You can go to like an asset management company, put in money in trust, but I know that there are escrows that say, you know what? Until this building is complete, we're not going to release the funds from the investor to be able to protect the financial investment. And I feel like people just don't do that. And everything you said ties back to deep research, right? A previous guest that I had on the show, she was talking about her business, and the theme of deep research is very, very critical. I'm learning this as a thought leader and someone who wants to do business, that it's not just okay to say you want to do something or invest in something or start an idea. The real work is in the deep research to be able to understand what you're going into, ask the right questions, and go to people who have, like yourself, like Adesuwa now is now available that you guys, maybe you will start writing columns on LinkedIn. I don't know if you do, but you should. Let people be able to reach out to you and ask you questions, or have a blog post on, guys, these are the things you should be looking at. People don't have that avenue. They don't even know where to research. I like what you said about Google Alert. I'm going to personally take that on. It's not even something that's even crossed my mind, right? But you can't stay up to date with information if you're not getting notified 24/7. So I like that. And okay, I don't even know if we're deviating. There's so many questions that I want to ask you.
I love the topic. Because even as you say things, you get me to think about different things. And in terms of things like, funding, which we know is such is such an important aspect, right, of getting into this industry, and it's such a difficulty in Nigeria. And just as you said, a lot of people will be thinking ultimately about, how do I even save up the funds to be able to get into the real estate game? I think, yes, you've got to think about really being very disciplined when you put away, savings, whether it's every month, a little portion every week, in order to try and begin to build up, that resource, right? So that you have some capital to do an investment. But I'm also clear that the cost of living in Nigeria generally is incredibly high, right? It's not that easy to save because often your money has to go into so many different expenses, right? Just to kind of to live, okay? So I think there are products out there. There are things like real estate investment trusts, right? Where you can have smaller amounts, so you're essentially sort of grouping funds together and then, making real estate asset purchases. So fine, you might not own an entire plot of land or an entire, unit or estate or whatever else the case may be. That may be too expensive, but you may still be able to benefit from wealth creation, generated by real estate more generally, because you are owning some sort of small portion of it, via something like a real estate investment trust. I know some people have informal, community savings. Exactly. Correct. With friends, with colleagues who you work with, with other members of your community, where you might group funds together and then decide, okay, on behalf of all of us, we're going to make some sort of investment in this real estate asset, right? That can also be something that perhaps people consider, and maybe some sort of, entry point for them if at this stage they can't quite afford, fully going into a real estate investment themselves.
Yes, correct. And I love that part that you said, because I was going to touch on it, like the informal gathering of like money. And sometimes I think we overcomplicate these processes. So like sometimes it's just until you start it, you don't know. And people kind of feel like, I don't even know like the investment house to go to. I don't even know where to begin. There's Vitiva Capital, for instance. I'm intentionally mentioning them because I worked in that space in finance. So they have a trust business, right? There's also Her Economy, right? So who's very big. If it was on my show, and they're currently even doing like a savings challenge. These are, fintech apps and asset management organizations that you can go to like save your money. But like you said, the informal space of, even if you don't want to do that based on, I've never done it before, I don't know, your friends. And I think sometimes we don't leverage the opportunity in front of us. We tend to just take life, and I'm guilty of this, very passively, right? I have a friend who is in finance, or I have a friend who's in real estate, and I take it passively to not ask specific questions, or to even say, Adesuwa, you're in this space. Can you gather like 5 to 10 of us to put money together, whether it's literally 500,000 naira each, 1 million, or even 100,000 naira to start with. And can we say that in a year or two, when the pot grows, we want to buy a unit? And it sounds small, but people don't realize that owning real estate is so, you can't, it's invaluable, right? It's something that you need generationally for like legacy. And you see that from time and time. It's a very key, yes. And, when I was doing more like work because of our interview, I said, okay, let me find like a quote to say or something about real estate. But this guy, Andrew Carnegie, who's like an American industrialist, I just came across him, to be very honest, based on this. And he said that 90% of wealthy people own a piece of real estate, right? And it's obvious because real estate has less risk attached to it. Like it's the volatility is not there, like saying, oh, you're going to invest in a stock, right? So depending on what's happening in your market, once you have property, you have property. Even if you rent it out, that's passive income that is for you, right? Legacy, this is property that can go to your children. So I think sometimes people despise and think, oh, I need to be, a millionaire, or like I need to, I don't come from like it, whatever that thing is. The point is that the opportunity is there, and you just need to grab it, and you just need to start. I'm looking forward to your thought leadership LinkedIn profiles. I've given you 2 solutions. We're going to follow up so as much. A community, I love to make sure that you do those things.
Thanks so much. I love that. Yeah. And, just to echo what you said about the importance of real estate as, an asset and as an investment. I think the first thing I'll say is, if you live in an area where real estate is incredibly expensive, the other thing you might perhaps consider is look at other more affordable areas and perhaps you start there, okay? You don't necessarily have to purchase or invest in real estate immediately to live in, okay? So you might live in a city like a Lagos, an Abuja, a Port Harcourt, right? Where the real estate there, the land, etc., is going to be much more expensive because these are major, city hubs, right? But you might think of other states, other areas where perhaps things are more affordable and you can put some money, into one of those other states or regions. Think about that. Think about pockets of value where there might be opportunities, where there might be states that are on the fringes, right, or bordering some of the, key central hubs. And you might be able to maximize those opportunities if you identify them early, you purchase land there, you then sell them for a profit. And as you gradually make those steps, you may then also through those processes be able to afford, property in some of the more expensive areas, right? Yeah. That's another sort of element that people can think about. And then I think in terms of data collection, because I know that you spoke about, how data collection is such an important aspect of all of this, both on the side of one who's thinking of entering into this business or thinking of, investing in real estate. And then just as you mentioned, also even in terms of those who are considering, the right sort of people to lend to. Data collection is really important and definitely needs to be improved in Nigeria. I think beyond data collection, how we use that data, how we aggregate the data so that we can spot, really important trends that tell us about a person's risk profile, and those sorts of other key things in terms of lending. And finally, the point that you mentioned about the different positives of real estate as an asset. I think that's something that as a real estate developer myself, I really do want to highlight and reinforce. I know there are a number of challenges when it comes to, entering into the real estate market in general and owning real estate as an asset. But there are some really key benefits that means that someone like me would always recommend real estate, as an asset in terms of part of your portfolio. Just as you've mentioned, there's a clear opportunity for long-term, wealth retention and generation, which means that you can pass it on, hopefully, to future generations. So just as you mentioned, that sort of legacy building, I think, is really key. It's a more stable asset than a number of others. Just like you said, it's something tangible, right? So there's an intrinsic value, there versus stocks and bonds, which can fluctuate a lot and be really volatile. I think when we think of Nigeria in particular, capital appreciation in terms of real estate here has also been a really, key benefit. And then inflation, right? Yeah. An inflation hedge, okay? I think that's so key in Nigeria. Yeah. Because when you look at areas like, some of the top prime areas like Ikoyi and things like that, and you look at the way in which prices have risen, along with inflation, you'll see that even in dollar terms, right? What tends to happen is if the Naira, continues to weaken, then these prices just increase so that you're still getting that wealth retention despite the inflation. So it is a really important, means of hedging against inflation as well. And then I think because it operates a little bit differently to other assets, to some of the other stocks and bonds out there, it's good for diversification as well, which is another key element when you think about where are you investing your resources. You want to be diversified so that if there's an issue, right, in one sort of pool of investment, exactly, you've got those backups in other areas that hopefully keep you afloat and still, comfortable. And then ultimately, let's go back to what we said about demand, right? The demand for real estate in Nigeria is only increasing, and it is going to continue to increase. It is a reality of the fact that the population continues to grow, right, at a high rate. It is a reality of the fact that our cities continue to develop overall. There is increasing urbanization. It is going to continue. We are a young population. I think it's something like 70% are literally under 30. So you're having a lot of people who are going to be thinking about entering into the job market and will often be attracted to the key sort of, urban hubs in Nigeria. They're going to need places to live. They're going to need places to stay, right? So it's a key element of what the country is going to need to survive. Therefore, if you can be an investor in that space, you are going to benefit, right, from that need. And then, of course, as you mentioned, that passive income. Rental income is such an important source of passive income from, in Nigeria, right? Think about rental income from long-term rentals to short lets to, hotel apartments sort of structures and setups. There's so many different things you can do when you own a piece of real estate, even if you're not living in it yourself.
I want us to also then touch on trends, right? And trends because, we've mentioned how Nigeria is so young. So many people are looking for apartments, etc., to develop, right? You need real estate is very important. Where do you see trends going in terms of the type of buildings, right? And this doesn't have to be data proven, but even just by observation. And the reason that I ask is when we were children, the typical housing structure was like mansions, etc., right? It was very different, right? And now in our generation, you find that a lot of us who are, building our own intimate, like nuclear family, we are picking things like just like, I just want like a really cool like apartment or like a townhouse, etc. We even find that cool, to be honest. It's like I don't really want to deal with like the cost of having like a mansion right now. Maybe by the time I'm like 50 or 60, like you see like the changing in our consumer behavior pattern is so different. And another thing that I have noticed, I'm not sure people have done this in terms of housing, but in terms of office spaces, even this building that we're currently in, it is not your traditional cement looking building. It's a container, right? I don't want to give the expo of where we are, but it's a container. Yeah. I have seen people who then have office spaces and they invest into these container type, exactly, building structures because they don't want to go the traditional route of doing the cement and the brick layout. I'm wondering what that trend is going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years. People are looking for housing in prime locations, but in a way that is affordable for them because they're so young. And like you said, inflation is going up. I don't know what's going to happen in the Nigerian market, but do we see trends evolving more towards like container-like structures? Are people going to be building things that are more like eco-friendly? And we're going to dive into Husk collection after this, but what would hotels even look like in the future? What would, a young person who is doing NYC say, this is what my flat looks like? Is it still just I live in an apartment, or people are evolving more towards these like container-like structures? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. What are your observations? Like, what do you think?
Okay. So I think I do believe that there'll be people who'll be exploring more alternative materials, more affordable materials in terms of what they're using to, construct different buildings, spaces, developments. So just as you said, I've also noted that trend of using containers. We may see even things like, prefabricated, right, materials, right, that are then imported or maybe one day made in Nigeria, which would be fantastic, and then used because they're more affordable and they can be developed quicker, right? I think people will be thinking about efficiency a lot when it comes to building, just because the cost of construction in Nigeria already is incredibly high. So I think this is something that we're really going to have to focus on and think more, about. I think we're generally going to see in a lot of the key urban hubs more and more apartment buildings, right? Versus large mansions and even terraces, to be honest. So I think we'll see more terraces compared to detached homes. We'll see more apartments compared to terraces, right? I think that's how the trend is going to go. And I think, this is really driven by the factors we've touched on already, right? Such high demand, so many people being attracted to these key urban hubs, it becoming more and more difficult to find affordable plots of land. And so developers or even people, purchasing land for themselves really thinking about wanting to maximize the use of space, right? The utility of the space that they buy, wanting to get as much as possible out of that space, which usually you can do via an apartment block, obviously, versus a detached, unit with a lot of sort of just excess space for one, family, right? So I think that's a trend that we're going to see more and more of. And I think really, if you look around Lagos especially, you'll notice that yourself. You'll see many more, apartment towers and blocks coming up. I would hope that we're going to see an increased focus on sustainable building practices, and environmental friendly building practices. I do really think that is something that is worth investing in. I think it can be challenging for various reasons. A lot of the times, just as with other points that we've touched on, there's not enough data, there about what is really working best. There's not enough effort and time put into research. As I mentioned earlier, you often find there's not so many people putting as much time as they should into the design stage and the sort of layout and architectural stages of things, so that they're really thinking about how best to develop a unit that, just as we said earlier, will make the most of natural resources. And that's beyond just things like the view of, a lake or having certain recreational areas or green spaces, but even in terms of the way the building itself is, constructed, the shape of the building, the spaces within the building, are you thinking about how that can also be sustainable and be maximizing the environment in which we're in, or leveraging the environments in which we're in, in the most optimum way, right? And I think that is something that people will think about more and more in the years to come. I think in the high-end space, because that's really the space that 715 sits within. So in the high-end sort of luxury space, I think that we're going to see more and more gated communities, actually. Communities in which there are different aspects that form a part of the overall residential development. So beyond just the units themselves, spaces that have things like park areas or mini park areas, maybe tennis courts, other sort of amenities, right? Whether it's mini salons, kids playground areas, all those sorts of things that mean that the clients who can, afford a luxury unit are thinking about their overall immediate environment, right? And how that can be as convenient for them as possible. And so when we are thinking of these high-end communities and spaces, we're really going to have to invest a lot into thinking about how are you improving not just their lives in terms of the specific unit in which they live, but how are you generally improving their social and economic experiences by giving them communities in which they can really thrive, whether it's through connections with fellow unit holders, right, that will live in these same sorts of spaces, or giving them additional spaces within the residential estates that they can really exactly commune and enjoy. And so for us, that's something we've already been thinking about. It's a feature of our residential estates, just as I mentioned, various amenities like clubhouses for residents, pools, garden spaces, water features, kids playgrounds, in one of our new projects that we'll launch this year, the Residence, for example, where we're featuring hotel apartments, we've got a kitchen space, built like a commercial kitchen, so that unit holders can actually order food, right? Just as you would from a hotel directly to their apartments. Because again, it's thinking about value add beyond just the unit in which, a resident sits, right? It's about how are we making your life more convenient in different ways.
Yeah, no, this is why I really like that you said that, because I feel like this is what sets buildings apart. And this is how you kind of need to just integrate community, family, the social aspects of things into like a building. Yeah. And traditionally, you don't really see those things, right? So I like that 715 is being very intentional to think about those things. You would find that a lot of people, maybe in Lagos, they have a really nice property, but then the feedback is, oh, I don't even know who my neighbor is, right? But we are blessed with community as Africans because, you know, you have your family, your friends just like turn into your house. So maybe sometimes you don't necessarily need to know your neighbor. But I think it's equally important to have that sense of community because I'm just going to the more social aspects of things. It makes us stronger as a people. As if you can connect with the person that is living beside you because there is a shared playground and your kids go down there, or there is a cinema room, for instance, downstairs. It makes you more connected as a people, and then it's a ripple effect as a people, your colleagues you work with, the people you live with as a nation. I don't know.
Exactly.
It's a ripple effect.
It really is important. And
yeah.
Just as you said, when you gave the example of your friends, for who were thinking, oh, maybe I'll purchase abroad instead of in Nigeria because there are some of those spaces, right? I can walk around to, parks and, enjoy other sort of elements of nature.
Cafes downstairs.
And precisely,
yes.
Right? Different things like that. And so for those of us who are dealing with clients who can ultimately afford, somewhere abroad or somewhere in Nigeria, it's important that we think about incorporating some of these, additions, right? So that they can have some of those same feelings here in Nigeria and not only abroad.
Yeah.
And so this is something
Correct.
that, we really continue to think about and that we incorporate in terms of our projects and our development.
Correct. And it also helps with retention because when you have that, it's like, but why am I going abroad? Like,
right.
Maybe beyond education. But
I
even
feel
at
so
that,
comfortable in my
debatable.
sanctuary
You want
here.
to be comfortable. Yeah. And I think for me, like, you find people in our generation that they're doing that, so to speak, whether it's like in their homes, in their own little spaces, creating like sancturies. Like that's something I'm very big on. For instance, I love like architectural. It's important. I love architectural digest. Even like my home, my husband and I, when we got married, that was something that was very big for me. It was like, this home must be like a haven. Right. What do we want to create? If I'm a green finger person and I love plants, I'm going to make sure that there is a patio area with green, with like a little hammock. These are just like examples, right? So imagine having a building that has those features for you. You're going to want to stay. You don't want to go anywhere, right?
100%. Lagos is hectic enough.
You just need your home to be a haven and a place of relaxation.
Yeah,
so I love that you guys are thinking deep. I love that you're thinking further into how do we ensure retention, but communities at the front line, right? But something I would love to see in terms of trends is like architectural depth. Again, I'm not an architect, but I find that when you travel to different countries, what captivates you, right? Beyond like the food, the culture, it's architectural design. You go to a museum, you're fascinated just by looking at the structure of that building. That building has an award because of the architectural depth. I think that this is something that Lagos, as a cosmopolitan city, can really take advantage of. Yes, we do have buildings that are, they're interesting to look at, but can we enforce more depth? And because you're in the space, maybe this is something that you guys can think about. So for instance, if you're going to construct, I don't know, let's say a library that is dedicated to West African history, right? I love things like that, where we can retain like the knowledge of like our people dedicated to Nigeria. Rather than just having a tall building, why not have a building that is shaped as a circle? Do you understand what I mean? Like,
100%.
Let us see architectural depth. And I feel that because there's so much construction going on, people are just thinking more in terms of profit and population size, and it's good. But what we don't realize is that when you have architectural depth, it's an incentive for more investment to come in, because people come into Nigeria, they come to see. Some people just, why do people say, oh, they're going to Paris? Like back then, the Eiffel Tower. Why do people say, oh my God, I want to go to Rome, whether it's the Trevi Fountain, whatever it is, Florence, River Arno, whatever it is, Barcelona, the key monuments. And I feel like as a nation, we need to start thinking about how building construction could serve as a hub for tourism and investments. People should be flocking in because, oh my God, I want to see this museum in Nigeria. It looks like this. It speaks to the culture of the people. Those things have legacy and are very important. But just before we round up, because I feel like we can go on and on.
Yeah, right. Because even as you were saying that, I was thinking of so many other things as well. And I was like, oh, we're so along the same lines.
Yeah. But as we go on, right, I want you 2 last questions. Can you touch on Husk collection? Because I think what you're doing is important. I love indigenous hotels, right? Props to like international hotels and stuff, but I really love indigenous hotels. I want you to touch on it.
Thank you so much. I think actually what you were just talking about in terms of thinking about our own heritage when it comes to our design and what we might be offering that is a little bit more unique, right, compared to what we've generally been offering in terms of, the buildings that we see across Nigeria, is a really nice segue into Husk Collection. Because when we conceived Husk Collection, my business partner and I, we really thought about creating a boutique hotel experience that wouldn't just feel cookie cutter like every other, hotel that one experiences across Nigeria or generally across the world. We really wanted to focus on boutique hotels so we could give guests a more custom and personalized experience, right? So we could really get to know our customers, and so we could build the sort of relationships that mean that our customers would be referring us to others because they were really excited about our service, our attention to detail. So Husk Collection is really the hospitality sister business, to 715. We focus on boutique hotels, on hotel apartments, and we really are thinking about offering the, traveler, the modern traveler, right, who's looking for convenience and looking for, like I said, a slightly unique experience, looking for a place in which one can feel and appreciate the environment in which one is actually sitting, right? Which is something that was important to us. So Clay House is our first boutique hotel location. It's located in Maitama in Abuja. We're actually currently working on our second location in Maitama as well. More information will come further down the line because we're only just sort of in the early stages of, working on the building itself. But one of the things we did, for example, in Clay House is we included a gallery corner to celebrate and feature, West African art.
Amazing.
Because it's something that we're really excited about sharing with our guests who come to visit us. And again, it's another way of establishing that connection with the environment, with, the location in which you're in. I think just as you said, I also feel quite strongly that a number of the buildings that we see now could ultimately be buildings sitting in London or France or Italy, right? They're just sort of replications
Correct.
of what one sees abroad. And don't get me wrong, I understand that for a number of developers, they will be constricted, in terms of what they're doing, limited by various factors, right? Cost obviously is a really major one. And then also thinking about what is it that the market is suggesting they're willing to pay for. And there's only a certain segment of the market that is willing to pay for the greater expense, right, that will have to be poured into building something really unique. So I can certainly understand that. I think we are fortunate, right, in that we play in this high-end space. And so we really can think about unique buildings and think about the additional features that will really beautify a space and mean that we're really thinking about our environment and celebrating the environment, in which we're located. But I know it's not the same for developers generally out there. So where we can, we try to make sure we inject pieces of our heritage, pieces of us, so that we're really celebrating those things. And that's something that you'll definitely see at Clay House. It also features a small restaurant and a small bar area. And then we've got a lovely outdoor sit out, which is a beautiful garden space. Again, celebrating that green area with lovely views across a part of Maitama, and a pool where one can relax. So really, really excited about that.
Amazing.
And, the things that are going to come on board this year, including the hotel apartments, like I mentioned, down the line.
Amazing. Thank you, Adesuwa. So that's for Husk Collection,
Yes,
and you
exactly.
provide the handles like after.
Yeah.
And just the last question, if there's one thing in your career experience, whether it's even before you went into real estate, when you were working in the law firm in Clifford Chance, or even in this space, if you could tell us one career regret or mistake that you've made, what would that be and what would you have done differently? And I ask this question intentionally because I think when young people hear from each other, it's very easy to hear the success, right? But people don't realize that success is not an overnight thing, right? It's a process. So if there's something that you could sort of take back, and it could be something like, oh, you signed a partnership and you realized it was wrong, you should have done more research. What can you share with us?
Yeah. So when I think about this question, I think for me, rather than sort of speak to one moment or one era, I think given my experience, I prefer to speak to, if I may, feelings that can be challenging, mental, right, challenges that one can experience when getting into business. Because I think really for me, that is what has had the greatest impact when I think of my professional journey and really even life, before that. I try not to live with regrets. I think of, every experience as much as I can, cliche as it is, but as a learning one, right? Yeah. You grow from each experience. In fact, I even remember watching, was a YouTube video, I think, and it was about an investor who was talking about, when he's evaluating businesses, and he said something really interesting about how when he's thinking about putting money into a business, he doesn't like putting money into businesses that are run by people who have not had a business that has failed. And that was really interesting to me because it spoke to how much he valued learning from failure, right? And so that is very much how I see, failure myself now. But in terms of the focus on what I battled with, and what I think is a really fantastic thing that one can work on early on, and it's imposter syndrome and battles with, anxiety about can you back up the things that you do? Are you worthy to be in certain spaces, right? Are you really good enough to gain these experiences or to walk into certain rooms and speak to certain people? And being someone who has dealt with anxiety for a great deal of my life, it's something that I think really affected me, in during certain periods. And I think if you can challenge yourself, right? Whatever small challenges you can think about, taking on step by step as a gradual process, go out there and do it afraid. I know that is easier to say than to actually do. Trust me, I've experienced it. I get nervous about every single public speaking occasion. I can assure you, I was sitting on a panel the other day. The night before, I barely slept until the panel was over. But I said, look, I've got to push myself. I've got to do it. And it honestly ended up being a fantastic success. And I really got wonderful feedback. But the truth is, even if it wasn't a success and I didn't get great feedback, one thing I always tell myself these days, and it's something I learned from a therapist of mine actually back in the day in terms of talking about some of these issues, is think about the worst case. And if you can deal and live with the worst case, it's okay. So fine, if your panel session goes awfully, what is the worst case? People will say, oh, she's not great at sitting on a panel. She's not that great a moderator. Life will move on. Correct. It's okay. I can live with that. There are far, more important things, more impactful things that feature in my life. And so, I can go on. So I just think that with every challenge in business that you think about, it's easy to cower. It's easy to hold yourself back and not give and show all the value you really have within you. But go out there, be bold about asking people questions, right? There are truly no dumb questions. Do your research and then go and ask questions. Think about different ways about doing things, right? It may be that in not asking what might seem basic questions, there are people out there who are missing fantastic opportunities. Correct. And you may be the one who highlights those opportunities to them because you have been bold enough to go out there, question things, share your thoughts, share your opinions. And so I think for me, that has been my biggest lesson, right? As I've grown in business, my partner is really good at encouraging me, right? In terms of, pushing myself forward, getting myself out there. And so if you don't always find that strength within yourself, think about friends, business partners, family members, whatever the case might be, who can give you that push, right? And sort of propel you forward in terms of taking on those challenges.
Oh, Adesuwa, thank you for the vulnerability and transparency. And I like that you didn't just share that this is where you had a problem, for instance, with anxiety, but the solution to dealing with that anxiety, which is one, what is the worst thing that can happen, right? I heard something the other day and it said that as human beings, we don't really think. We kind of just do life. So, I need to get up in the morning. I get up, I'm making breakfast, I'm doing work. We're not really thinking. We think that we're thinking about our day, but we're not really sitting with our thoughts. what you said about you think about the worst scenario, I think is a huge strategy to help with like your mental process and success. Like you just sit down and you process all the worst things that can possibly happen. Okay, someone laughs. Okay, they say she's not that great. But and so what, right? You are the one who actually got the opportunity and not them. But just being able to think through things within yourself. I like that you mentioned getting support, right? You mentioned you spoke to a therapist. Culturally, that is something that is growing with our generation, right? Because we're more aware of these things. We're more cognizant of the fact of, oh, why is it that when I need to do something important, my heart is beating so fast, or my hands get clammy, or it feels like I can't breathe? Those things are not, as our culture would say, oh, there's a spiritual attack or something is happening to you. Sometimes it's that, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But sometimes it's literally just you've made yourself so anxious unnecessarily.
Exactly.
So I can identify with what you said equally, that, you know, when you then do this presentation, there is a sense of relief and a sense of, wow, this was incredible. The feedback that you got. But people don't see what Adesuwa was like before. People will not see what Zephia was like before the podcast. That you didn't sleep, you didn't eat, you've put yourself in this mental state of just anxiety unnecessarily. And finding the tools as a business person is very important. People aren't really talking about tools. It's okay to say, oh, this is a shared struggle, but what is the tool? So I like that you said talking to like your friends about it. Let them encourage you, because your friends and family, they see the best in you. They literally see, but wait, what are you referring to? This is your strength. You're very eloquent when you speak. You have very great memory retention. So therefore, those two factors combined, you are set up for victory and success already, right? And I feel that people just need these tools, and it's good to hear that you as an expert within that field, you've gone through these challenges and you've overcome them, and you're still overcoming them, because as the more projects you do, the more fears you're going to encounter, but it's about overcoming them. Yeah, so this was great. It was fantastic having you on the podcast. We've spoken about so much.
Yeah.
So guys, you need to follow Adesuwa, because if you want to learn about all things real estate, go on her page. She's about to begin a thought leadership series on LinkedIn about all you need to know about real estate investments in Nigeria. But most importantly, if you're interested in developing property, or you want to invest in 715 Capital or learn more about their businesses, you can follow them on the social media handles. If you're in Abuja and you're looking for a really nice boutique space to be in, there's the Husk collection. The handle for 715 Capital and Husk collection is just on the screen, and you can follow up to find out more about their businesses. So guys, stay tuned for amazing guests that are coming. You've heard this was such a fantastic and well-packed interview session. Don't forget to follow us at the Star Network Pod on our channels. Don't forget to give us a subscription and a like or a thumbs up or a comment, and we look forward to more episodes. That's it for now. Bye.